Welcome to the Explainer. You know, every single week the White House drops a ton of announcements, proclamations, and executive orders. It's honestly a lot to keep up with. So in this Explainer, we're going to cut right through all that noise, using these slides to break down 1 week of action and really see what it tells us about the administration's top priorities.
All right, so here's how we're going to break it all down. We've grouped this week's activities into 5 key areas. We'll kick things off with a big picture look at everything the White House did. Then we'll dive into the economic story they're telling. After that, we'll look at their homeland security policies, their ambitious new plans for space, and finally, we'll unpack some of the specific presidential powers that were on display.
Okay, first up, let's just talk about the sheer scope of what the White House deals with. I mean, it's pretty wild when you look at it. Any given week is a mix of the ceremonial and the serious, and this week was a perfect example. And this slide just lays that contrast out perfectly, right? On one side, you've got this really heartwarming message about volunteers from all over the country coming to decorate the White House for Christmas. And then, bam, on the other side, you have a very serious proclamation on national security, restricting who can enter the country. It's just such a stark reminder of the two hats the White House wears. It's both a national symbol and the absolute center of power. So, speaking of power, that brings us right to our next big topic, the economy. And let me tell you, the administration is pushing a really specific story here, a narrative that they are calling the American comeback. And really, the whole foundation for this comeback story is built on this one really powerful quote from the president's year-end address. He said, "We're poised for an economic boom, the likes of which the world has never seen." Now, that's not just a casual prediction. It's a very deliberate move to frame all the economic news that follows in the most positive way possible. Okay, so you hear that and you think, all right, where's the proof? Well, one of the main stats the White House is pointing to is core inflation. Now, that's just a way of measuring rising prices that leaves out the really jumpy stuff like food and gas. According to their report, it's the lowest it's been in almost 5 years. The message they're sending is crystal clear. We're successfully managing the cost of living for Americans. Now, this gets right to the heart of the administration's whole economic philosophy. Look at the contrast. They're highlighting a gain of 121,000 private sector jobs right next to a cut of 168,000 federal government jobs. This isn't an accident. It's making a very clear argument that their goal is to shrink government in order to, as they see it, let private business thrive. And it doesn't stop there. I mean, they rolled out a whole dashboard of good news, at least from their perspective. You've got claims about cheaper gas, mortgages costing less, and real wages going up. Plus, they're pointing to 2.7 million native-born Americans getting jobs. Each of these data points is a piece of a larger puzzle, designed to show an economy where things are getting cheaper and jobs are more available for their base. So it wasn't all just about big-picture numbers. They also took some very direct action, like this warrior dividend. We're talking about a check for $1,776, a very symbolic number, right? Sent to more than 1.45 million service members right before the holidays. It's a very concrete, tangible benefit aimed directly at a key group, mixing financial help with a strong patriotic message. Okay, so from keeping things secure economically at home, the focus now pivots to securing the nation's borders. In this next section, we're going to look at the specific plans they announced for securing the homeland. And a huge piece of this strategy is a presidential proclamation that keeps in place a ban on entry to the U.S. for people from certain countries. The official reason given is that these countries have, and this is their wording, deficient security screening and vetting standards. And, to show that these policies are actually having an effect, they put out a very specific number. They're stating that more than 2.5 million people, termed illegal aliens in their documents, have been removed from the country. Using a hard number like this is a classic tactic to show that their policies aren't just talk, they're producing measurable results. But it wasn't just that one number. The White House basically laid out its entire case for what it calls total control of the southern border. They're talking about border crossings hitting historic lows, ending what they call catch and release, and running successful operations in so-called sanctuary cities. They also claim to have rescued over 62,000 migrant children. Every single one of these claims is meant to build a picture of strength and total control. But, Homeland Security this week wasn't just about the border. The big defense bill that just got signed, it includes something called the Safer Skies Act. And this is a big deal because it gives local and state police new powers to deal with threats from drones, which the administration is framing as a serious and growing risk here at home. All right, now let's pivot from what's happening here on the ground all the way up to the final frontier. We're going to dive into a new executive order that maps out a super ambitious plan for America and space, and it covers everything from exploration to defense. And the whole policy really hinges on this one key idea: American space superiority. But what does that actually mean? Well, as the order lays it out, it's not just about planting a flag. It's about leading in three key areas: exploring space, keeping our interests secure in space, and building a commercial economy in space. It's all about pushing boundaries while protecting the homeland. And what's really wild about this new policy is just how specific and honestly how ambitious the timeline is. This is not some far-off 50-year dream. Look at these dates. We're talking about returning to the moon by 2028, and in that same year, showing off new missile defense tech. Then just 2 years later, in 2030, starting to build a permanent base on the moon and finding a commercial replacement for the ISS. I mean, these are massive goals in a very short amount of time. So how are they going to pull all that off? Well, the whole plan is built on these four main pillars. First, lead the world in exploring space. Pretty straightforward. Second, secure and defend national interests up there. Third, grow a booming commercial space industry. And fourth, develop and use the most advanced tech. It's a pretty solid game plan that connects science, defense, and business. And that third pillar, the one about business, it comes with a pretty huge investment target. The goal is to get an extra $50 billion in private money pouring into American space companies by 2028. This just goes to show you how much of this new space race is going to be fueled by private companies, not just the government. Okay, that brings us to our final section. Let's talk about powers and proclamations, because this is where we get to see some of the other executive actions from the week, and they really shine a light on that constant back and forth, that dialogue between the president and Congress. So first, there was a pretty standard, but still very important, executive order about pay raises for federal workers. Now, this happens every year, but it affects a massive number of people, from soldiers to your local civil servant, and these new rates, they're set to kick in 2026, which will have a real impact on the budgets of millions of families. Of course, the week wasn't all policy and budgets. There were also more ceremonial things, like this proclamation for Bill of Rights Day. And the language here is really interesting. The administration pledged to defend our God-given rights. Using that specific phrase, God-given, is a very deliberate choice that frames their view of the Constitution through a particular cultural and religious lens. And this last one, this is a fantastic example of that classic constitutional tug-of-war between the president and Congress. So when the president signed the big defense bill, he attached what's called a signing statement. And this slide basically breaks down the conflict. Congress passes a law saying, hey, you need to give us a report before you take certain military actions. But the president's statement basically says, well, as commander-in-chief, my authority might just override that. It's a power play we see time and time again. So there you have it. That was the week. A huge focus on the economy, a really firm stance on national security, and this incredibly bold new vision for space. Put it all together, and you get a really clear snapshot of this administration's priorities. And that, of course, leaves us with a big question you see right here. How might all these announcements actually shape policy and our lives in the year ahead? Thanks for watching The Explainer.